I am Gary Freeman, and I have over 30 years experience in the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. We have developed this webinar as an introductory course to discuss the basic concept of good clinical practice, or GCP as we affectionately refer to it. Its common elements include the 13 principles as itemized in the ICH guidelines, ICH standing for International Conference on Harmonization. These are the principles that are used globally for all of our clinical trials, and they're embraced by the FDA in our law for the United States studies known as the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR. We look at the learning objectives today to give you some guidance as to how we utilize the good clinical practices in the clinical arena. I'm going to hit you with some concepts or some acronyms, some abbreviations perhaps, that are not familiar to you. If that is the case, please don't hesitate, because I'd be only too glad to discuss what that acronym means. In our industry, we throw a lot of these around, and the assumption is everyone is on board with us. Our learning objectives today, then, are going to be shown on the next slide. We're going to look at the goals of GCP, good clinical practice. Why do we have them? Why do we need them? We'll also discuss the various regulations, the drug, the device, and the biologic investigational products related to good clinical practice. We're going to recognize the mutual accountability and the responsibilities for each of the stakeholders in clinical research. These stakeholders would include the sponsor, the investigator, the IRB, or IEC as commonly called in the European Union, and the regulatory authority. We'll be speaking mostly about the FDA for the United States, but this concept would be consistent with the Europeans as well. The EMA, the MHRA in the UK, the Japanese Ministry of Health, and so on. We're going to apply the 13 principles of ICH, GCP, to quality research studies to ensure that we're complying with the regulations. As we get started, we want to talk about the mission of FDA. The mission, or any other regulatory authority, I should add. There are two primary missions. The first one is to protect the rights, the safety, and the well-being of subjects. The second is to ensure compliance so that the data that we collect is credible. And that way we will allow the regulatory authority to assess the safety and efficacy of the product that's being tested and allow them to review and approve it. To do this, we need some good clinical practices. We need a baseline. We need an international, consistent type of study program. So when we talk about GCP, what are we really talking about? We're talking about everything that's involved in the clinical trial. This becomes a standard for how we design our studies to begin with. It affects the protocol then. It affects the statistics. It affects the analysis. How do we actually conduct the study? This is at the investigational site. It will bring in the ethics, the reliability of the data. How do we all perform? How do we monitor the study so that we can trust the data? We need to have source documents. We need to have some credible evidence that the study was real. We often will then do auditing of that project. It's going to affect how we record all the information, whether it be regulatory documents or data collection. Again, how we analyze those data points, how we make use of the information that we gather. And lastly, how we report this information. The clinical study reports have become very standard across the country and across the globe, so that we can provide assurance that the data that's reported is credible, it's accurate, and that we have protected the rights, integrity, and confidentiality of all the subjects that participated. This is defined in the ICH in Section 1.24. Section 1 is a glossary. It is deeply rooted in our laws and regulations. The law in the United States being Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations.